All righty. Anyway, moving right along here, we're talking about the Occupy movement. We're talking more and more of the Occupy people are saying it's time now to occupy the corporate media, because that's what the Egyptian freedom fighters did when they started their camping out in Tahrir Square. Is they went and they occupied the newspapers and the TV stations to get their message out and not have to rely on the internet, especially when the government began to cut those lines and try and shut that down here. And it's going to escalate from here. Obviously, at this point, I got all these emails from people saying, well, we've got to do this to send a message. We got to do this to send a message, and all the rest of this stuff. No more messages. We have been sending messages to this government for decades. The messages are being ignored. No more messages. Okay? It is time to basically remember that John F. Kennedy was absolutely right when he said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And I don't like it, but from where I sit, we're there. We're on the verge of it right now, because the money junkies would rather burn down half the country as long as it allows them to keep ownership of the other half. And that is what makes money junkies so dangerous. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with the last segment of our show after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Last segment of the show today, and I want to talk about something very, very serious. As you are aware, over the weekend, the European Union basically yanked the rug out from under the attempts by the United States to impose an oil embargo on Iran, to force Iran to get rid of their nuclear weapons, which they don't actually have, but it's just the latest excuse to try and provoke a war. And the goal was, by adding economic pressure to Iran, to try and force Iran to do something overt that the U.S. could use as an excuse to launch a military intervention. And it looked like Iran was, talking about closing the Strait of Hormuz as a credible threat to try and deter this oil embargo. And then at the last second, China had said, we're not going to honor the embargo. Russia had said, we're not going to honor the embargo. Japan came out and said, well, we're still friends with the United States and we support your policies, but we really can't do the embargo either. We need the oil over here. And Europe basically came out and said it would be at least 6 months before they could get involved. And so now Iran has no reason to close the Strait of Hormuz, because if the U.S. refuses to buy Iran's oil, big deal. Iran will just sell it to other countries. So that whole approach to starting this war that Israel wants your kids to die in collapsed. Well, the U.S. backed off, and their posturing over the last 48 hours has been, well, this was all Israel's idea anyway. We're working to restrain Israel from attacking Iran, and they're putting the onus back on Israel for this whole thing. Israel, of course, as they always do, has thrown a tantrum. How dare you not kill our enemies? And so they came out with a story earlier today. Israel ready to strike Iran without Washington's approval, like Israel would ever need Washington's approval for anything. Basically, Israel is trying to say to Washington, D.C., we're going to attack, and you're going to have to clean up the mess for us, whether you like it or not. And if Israel wants to attack Iran, I say let them do it. It's just not send our kids and our weapons and our money to help them do it. What's that old saying? How do you stop a dog from chasing a car? You let him catch one. And that'll basically be the end of it. We need to do that. We need to let Israel go off and attack one of these countries they're always attacking, only this time we're not there to pay for it. We're not there to have our kids die in it. We're not there to send them the weapons. And let them learn what real life is all about here. So Israel wants this war between the United States and Iran, and what is interesting right now is, of course, this provides us with a litmus test going to the campaign, because with one notable exception, Ron Paul, all of America's candidates and politicians are clearly more interested in Israel's welfare than that of the United States of America. It's like that caller just said. When you're walking around Washington, D.C., everybody's talking about Israel this and Israel that. America and Americans' problems, that's not even an issue anymore inside Washington, D.C. So even as Leon Panetta is out there admitting Iran does not possess and is not making nuclear weapons, even as the IAEA heads back into Iran to confirm that reality for the umpteenth time, even as so many people are trying to pull us back from the brink of taking our low-intensity World War III and making it truly global and radioactive, Israel still wants the U.S. to go kill the Iranians for them. They want to start a war that American kids are going to be forced to complete. So what we need right now is to put every single candidate for President of the United States of America and members of Congress, put them on the spot, tell us why they think American children should be blown to bloody bits fighting yet another one of Israel's endless wars against Israel's innocent and unoffending neighbors, and let them live with that decision come election time. Because no government can serve two masters, and America needs leaders who are going to put America first, second, and third. Now, Israel's still out there screaming that Iran is a threat, Iran is bad, Iran is they're desperate to find something now. With this Strait of Hormuz issue now gone, and even America's top nuclear expert has gone public saying there is no weapons threat from Iran. So Israel's out there screaming, well, Iran is providing weapons to Hezbollah, and Iran is doing this, and Iran is going to attack U.S. targets in Turkey. They're trying to find something they can get traction with. And no, Iran is not going to attack U.S. targets in Turkey. Why would they do something that stupid? And remember the Lavon affair, when Israel was bombing American targets inside Egypt and planting evidence to frame the Egyptians. Israel has a long history of dirty tricks to trick America into going out and killing Israel's enemies. According to Viktor Ostrovsky, ex-Mossad agent, Mossad smuggled a radio transmitter into Libya and used it to send phony radio traffic that tricked Ronald Reagan into bombing Tripoli, killed Gaddafi's daughter. This is what Israel does, and we need to be on the lookout for this. And again, go back to history. Iran does not invade other countries and try to conquer them. Since Iran became an Islamic Republic in 1979, the only war they've fought is the one against Iraq that was launched by Iraq at the instigation of the United States of America, which does not like it when a country they have overthrown and shackled to a puppet ruler like the Shah of Iran decides to free itself. How dare you kick out our puppet ruler? That's not how it's supposed to work. We're going to reconquer you. We're going to overthrow your new democratically elected government. We're going to put a new puppet back in there. And that's what they're trying to do. They overthrew the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. And it was all sweetness and light and profits for the oil company until 1979, when the Iranians took back their own country. Well, we can't have that. We'll have our buddies in Iraq invade. That didn't work out too well. Well, fire the head of Iraq for failing to conquer Iran for us. And it goes on and on and on. So the reality here is that Iran is not the problem. Iran is not the threat. Iran does not attack and invade other countries. They haven't for 200 years, even before they were an Islamic Republic. They don't need to. They just sit and sell their oil and basically live life and mind their own business. It's Israel that's constantly attacking other countries, bombing the power station at Osirik in Iraq, invading Lebanon, invading the West Bank, invading Gaza, bombing Syria, invading Egypt. They're the threat to world peace. The United States, it's just insane how many countries the United States is constantly invading. In fact, give me a minute here. I'm going to bring up, I really ought to just go in here and read the list to you. Because the reality is Iran is another unoffending, innocent nation that's just trying to mind its own business and sell its oil, and they want to run their country for themselves. And that, of course, is the big threat to the United States and to Israel. So anyway, since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when they kicked out the U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah, Iran has been an Islamic state. And in that interval of time, Iran has not invaded anybody. Not once. Claims that they are a threat are based on fraudulent information. This entire case that they had nuclear weapons, which is already crumbling, was based on a planted laptop which traces back to Mossad. Same source of all the fraudulent information about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. All came out of Ariel Sharon's office before he had his stroke. So from 1979 to the present, as an Islamic Republic, Iran has not invaded anybody, not once. People of all religions live in peace in Iran, even Jews who find life so comfortable in Iran, they refused an offer by the government of Israel to emigrate. Israel said, we'll give you a bunch of money to come over here and live as in Israel, and the Iranian Jews said, no, we're comfortable here. We got good neighbors, we got good businesses, we're well treated here. Certainly not like the way Israel treats the Palestinians. You know, there's no apartheid in Iran like there is in Israel. It's a very pleasant place to live if it's not being bombed. So from 1979 to the present time, Israel, the self-declared Jewish state, bombed the power station in Osirik, Iraq in 1981, claiming it was a clandestine weapons factory. And it wasn't. After the invasion of 2003, international experts examined the wreckage of the power station, and it was just a power station. Then in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon. There was the massacres of Sabra and Shatila. 2003, Israel invaded Gaza and Nablus. September 2007, Israel bombed Syria, again saying it was a clandestine weapons laboratory, and again there was no evidence to support this. The only clandestine weapons laboratory under a reactor is at Dimona in Israel. Mordecai Vanunu put it out there. Israel's a nuclear power. The U.S. government doesn't want to admit it because that would make sending your tax money to Israel illegal under U.S. law. Under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the United States government to send your money to any nation that possesses nuclear weapons technology but has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and does not allow IAEA inspections. Both the U.S. government and the United Nations have requested Israel to sign the NNPT and allow inspections, and Israel continues to refuse. And the U.S. government is forced to pretend that Israel does not have nuclear weapons, because otherwise every penny of your money that's being sent to Israel for Israel to send back and bribe the Congress with would be illegal under U.S. law. So let's see. 2006, Israel attacks Lebanon, including UN observers. February 2008, raided Gaza. Hamas agreed to a ceasefire and kept it for 6 months until November 4th, 2008, when Israel attacked without warning, killing 6 Hamas members and launching Operation Cast Lead. 1,300 Gazans, mostly civilians, were killed. Let's see. United Nations investigated. Israel refused to cooperate. May 2010, Israel attacked an international aid flotilla bringing food and medical supplies to Gaza in international waters. 9 people were murdered, including an American from New York, and our government did nothing about it. So, 1979 to the present, Iran's minding its own business, not invading anybody. The United States has attacked El Salvador 1980, Libya 1981, Sinai 1982, Lebanon again 1982 and 83, Egypt 1983, Grenada 1983, Honduras 1983, Chad 1983, Persian Gulf 84, Libya 86, Bolivia 86, Iran 87, Persian Gulf 87, Kuwait 87. Do you get it? Do you get who is the threat to world peace? It is not Iran. It's the one nation that actually has used nuclear weapons against the civilians of another country, and you're standing on that nation that did that. That's it for our show. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Jeff Rense Radio Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well. Support Ron Paul. Call anybody you know in South Carolina and tell them to vote for Ron Paul. And aloha, America.